What if a single selection could change how a national side thinks about its midfield for the next World Cup cycle? What if a coach's faith in one player forced an entire tactical blueprint to be reconsidered? That is the moment Rassie Erasmus faced when he put faith in Ethan Hooker. A young, physical, unusually mobile centre from Durban, who arrived on the Springbok radar by doing the everyday work rather than chasing attention. Ethan Hooker is a 22-year-old product of Durban's rugby pathways who moved through school and club setups into the Sharks system, and then onto United Rugby Championship duty. His physical profile, tall, powerful, and mobile, sits differently to the traditional inside centre mold. He is the kind of athlete who can carry direct lines like a forward but also shift laterally and handle the short passing and timing that modern inside centers need. That duality is what put him on the national list when Springbok squads were expanded in 2025 to widen the talent pool and expose newcomers to test environments. At Sharks training grounds, the conversations about Hooker were not about flash, they were about routine. Coaches pointed to video study habits, recovery discipline, and a willingness to practice the same small details until they become instinct. That background mattered. In a setup like the Springboks, where combinations and reliability are prized, what convinces a national coach is not necessarily one highlight moment, but the pattern of preparation. Hooker's steady rise, club games, Currie Cup appearances, then URC minutes made it reasonable for selectors to bring him into the wider camp and watch how he handled environment, intensity, and scrutiny. But there is more at play than one player checking boxes. Rassie's selection philosophy from early 2025 signaled a deliberate plan: widen the net, give experience to younger players, and accelerate their learning by exposing them to test conditions early. That strategy turned selection into a strategic experiment, part development, part identification. When a coach starts to think in cycles rather than single squads, players like Hooker stop being odd choices and start looking like deliberate investments in the next cycle of national teams. For a city like Durban, this felt personal. Local supporters saw the Sharks' pathway rewarded, and a homegrown name on the national map. For the team, it was a test of culture. Would trust in process translate to trust on the field? For Hooker, it was a moment to translate club habits into national readiness. And when a coach is willing to make that leap, the game's shape begins to shift in subtle but powerful ways. What if modern rugby asks for multi-tools rather than single-task specialists? Ethan Hooker is the kind of tool a coach can use in many different ways, and slide wider when a match demanded extra size out wide. Those numbers don't make decisions on their own, but they speak to selectors. IRC performance logs show Hooker's involvement in tackles, carries, and breakdown work at a steady clip, while his tackle success and finishing polish are in development. Normal for a young international prospect, his involvement rate explains why coaches began to consider him as more than a developmental afterthought. In short, he gets around the puck and he shows he is willing to do contact work consistently. Those traits are tangible when coaches weigh whether a player can handle multi-phase responsibility at test level. Rassie's approach is practical and, to some, impatient. He has repeatedly shown willingness to rotate, to expose, and to accept short-term turbulence for longer-term gains. The 2025 squad calls with an expanded group, including a number of uncapped names, were purposeful. Rassie and his coaching staff clearly signaled that they would be prepared to trial players under pressure rather than wait for a perfect slow-cooked pathway. That philosophy reframes the selection of Hooker from risky experiment to strategic investment. The most intense classroom in world rugby is often an All Blacks test. When Hooker first made matchday involvement against New Zealand, coming off the bench in a pressure fixture and then earning his first test start in the following match, it was the kind of baptism many players never get in their careers. That step up was a practical test. Could a young utility back cope with an atmosphere steeped in rivalry, the speed of decision-making required, and the mental demands of the highest level? The selection and the start were discussed widely in the media, and by those inside the setup. Hooker himself described the experience as surreal and humbling, admitting he felt nerves but also gratitude, the kind of honest reaction that keeps a player rooted, Reporters captured his emphasis on process. He kept talking about habits, about the work he still needed to do, and about how the moment was a step in a much longer apprenticeship. For many viewers, the image of a Durban player starting in such a fixture crystallized the national conversation. Are we testing youth enough, and are we prepared to accept the stumbles that come with rapid development? From a coaching perspective, the move was a deliberate stress test. Name a young player in a hostile environment. See how they cope, and then judge whether the exposure advances their growth curve or damages it. Rassie's track record shows he prefers to drive that growth under fire. The early results of that philosophy are mixed, sometimes uncomfortable, but they are producing a bigger pool of tested players who now know what international intensity looks like before a tournament proper arrives. That matters when a coach needs to call on depth under the pressure of knockout rugby. There are practical ripple effects when a coach opts for a utility figure in the midfield. First, positional complements change. The winger and outside center now prepare for different reads because the inside threat may carry instead of spit a flat pass. Second, substitution patterns recalibrate. Bringing on a specialist becomes a tactical choice rather than a routine swap. Third, opposition teams must rework their preparation because a multi-role player forces defensive line adjustments and new decision points. At ground level, Sharks coaches and staff emphasized that Hooker's growth was not overnight. It was the result of small, repeatable behaviors, consistent recovery work, attention to video detail, willingness to take coaching direction, and the daily grind of positional rehearsals. For Rassie, those habits are more persuasive than a momentary flash, and that is why coaches sometimes pick temperament and process over pure perfection. These indicators matter when the calendar tightens and a coach has to call on depth across long tours. But there is also a human element to this gamble. Young players are people with families, with hopes and fears. Throwing them into pressure fixtures can accelerate development, but it also demands strong support structures, senior leaders in the squad, good management of minutes, and clear communication about role and expectation. Rassie has tried to balance that by rotating senior figures and by creating a culture of accountability and learning. Whether that balance holds as the schedule tightens is the real question for those who care about long-term player welfare and team cohesion. Finally, there's the national conversation. South African supporters love a bold move, but they also require results. When a coach selects youth in big moments, the discourse becomes about trade-offs between winning now and building for later. Rassie appears content to make that trade, accept some short-term volatility, widen the pool, and force development under authentic pressure. It is a philosophy that can pay off if the young players learn quickly and veteran leadership steadies the ship. So where does this leave Ethan Hooker in the wider Springbok plan? For Hooker, it's simple and also enormous. Keep earning minutes, keep refining the fundamentals, and let exposure convert into instinct. For Rassie, it's a test of conviction. Keep investing in a broader group and hope that the early trials produce several tournament-ready options by the time the World Cup cycle reaches its peak. The gamble is not reckless. It is informed by data, by training observations, and by a clear plan to build a deeper, more adaptable squad. If the experiment succeeds, this Springboks could gain a backline that can morph across opponents, a midfield that can trade tempo and power, go wide one moment and crash through the middle the next. That tactical flexibility would be valuable in long competitions, and it would mean South Africa could remain unpredictable in an era where opposition analysis is exhaustive. If it fails, Rassie will be blamed for impatience, and Hooker will have to rebuild confidence at provincial level before earning another crack. Both outcomes are part of any plan that prioritizes learning under load. For his supporters in Durban and beyond, Hooker's story is a reminder of old rugby truths and new realities. Talent still matters, but so does development. And systems that reward steady habits will eventually produce the players who can wear the green jersey with consistency. For the national setup, the lesson is to keep building systems that expose youngsters in supportive ways so that the pressure they face accelerates development rather than burns talent out. Ethan Hooker's rise is a test case for that model. Ethan's playing style has shades of modern centers like Lucanio Am, but with his own twist. He isn't trying to be flashy, but there's a confidence in how he plays that makes you think he knows exactly where he belongs. At the Sharks, he showed he could control the tempo of a match without making it all about himself. That kind of presence is rare in a young player, but international rugby is a whole different beast. Could he bring that same control against the toughest opposition in the world? What followed in those early tests gave us the first real glimpse of where his career might go. In camp, he's been described as someone who doesn't get overawed by the moment. That's critical when you're thrown into the Springbok environment, where standards are sky high and mistakes are not easily forgiven. Some players crumble under that intensity. Ethan seemed to embrace it, but in rugby, it's never just about your attitude. It's about how you perform when the ball comes your way, and that's exactly where the next chapter of this story takes us. Many supporters embraced Ethan Hooker as the face of the next generation. They see in him a player who can bridge the gap between the physicality of the traditional bulk approach and the fluidity of the modern game. But others are skeptical. They point to his limited experience and argue that South Africa can't afford to take risks in the backline. It's a debate that isn't going away anytime soon, because the more Hooker plays, the more he forces people to take a side. And that tension between excitement and caution is exactly why his story has captured so much attention. So, is Ethan Hooker Rassie's biggest backline gamble yet? The truth is, the jury's still out. But here's the thing about South African rugby. The greatest stories usually start with someone taking a chance. And Rassie Erasmus has never been afraid of making bold calls. If Ethan Hooker fulfills his potential, he could redefine what the Buck backline looks like for years to come. If not, he'll be remembered as a talented youngster who came close but couldn't quite make the leap. Either way, his journey is just beginning.